Harlem, for nearly a century, synonymous with Black America. However, according to the 2000 census, African Americans made up 77% of Central Harlem, and in 2009, the American Community Survey cites the percentage shrank by double digits. While the numbers are in dispute, there is a consensus that Harlem is a community in transition and that African Americans are likely no longer the majority. But what happens to the culture when gentrification leaves blacks as the minority in Harlem? Dr. Lance Freeman, a professor of urban planning at Columbia University and author of There Goes the Hood, which looks at gentrification from the perspective of longtime residents, defines the term.
It's really about the transformation of a neighborhood from one that you could describe as, relatively speaking, relatively poor to one that is becoming more affluent. Race is not synonymous, or racial change is not necessarily synonymous with gentrification, but I do think it is an indicator of gentrification just because in the US, whites tend to be more affluent than blacks. And typically it's the case that whites that are moving into neighborhoods like Harlem tend to be the more educated, more affluent whites.
Frank Perry, chairman of Central Harlem's Community Board 10, takes a different view.
Some people call gentrification an influx of new residents in Harlem. But our community, Harlem has always been evolving and changing. We haven't been a stagnant community.
Unlike many African American neighborhoods where historically blacks were relegated to the most undesirable sections, African Americans chose to migrate to Harlem in the early 1900s. Its beautiful brownstones, wide streets, and easy access to Midtown Manhattan and the outer boroughs make it one of New York's most desirable locations. Ramona Gray Harris is the senior vice president of her family-owned firm, Edwards Sisters Realty. The company, founded in 1925, is one of New York State's oldest black-owned and operated real estate and property management companies. She explains Harlem's rising home prices and the feelings expressed to her by many longtime residents.
Harlem became a mecca of affordability all of a sudden. You can buy a brownstone, the same brownstone, if we took from 147th Street and put it down on 96th Street, might have been 1.2 million. At that time was only $600,000 up here, or $300,000. It was affordable. But as people bought the brownstones and evicted everybody out of the unit or took over the units and renovated, people had to go someplace. And this was not the place. So as a result, according to the census, we no longer are the majority, we're the minority here in Harlem at this moment. On the streets, you always hear people say that they're not going to get rid of me in Harlem. This is where I live, this is where I grew up. But everything became very expensive. So the Bronx became more affordable than Harlem. So where you would have a studio or a two-bedroom going for $450, now they may be up to $1,500, and a two-bedroom up to like $2,000. And people can't afford that.
But with the changing landscape, there have been benefits and downsides.
The advantages are that we now have more retail than before. On 125th Street, we now have H&M, we have Marshalls, we have Magic Johnson, we have K&G, we have huge Cinderella, we now have a Fairway on 125th Street. They came in because of the response and because this was an affordable area where they were going to get a nice market share, and they did come in. I would say at this moment, what has now happened on 125th Street and what's quietly kept unknown is that we never owned these properties on 125th Street. They were always owned by big conglomerates.
The opening up of newer and different types of commercial establishments, and sometimes people felt like these establishments were opening up, but they were not welcome inside, either because the prices were too high or it just seemed as though they were targeting a different type of clientele. And so as the neighborhood changes like that, people perhaps don't feel as welcome there, and so they kind of feel like they're being pushed out.
But as the makeup of Harlem continues to shift, is the culture of African Americans being lost?
For the most part, the old Harlem nights are being lost. Harlem, its history, its understanding of life is being lost. The people coming in and the young people don't understand what it was like to be able to take part in Strivers Row of a Christmas tree pageant or everybody knew people. They knew who were other. Now you can't pick up the same phone and say, do you remember when?
What does a Harlem in transition look like?
We're seeing an influx of a lot of different kinds of people. We have a burgeoning West African population, one of the largest Senegalese populations in the city. That's it's a huge community in Central Harlem. We have an influx of Latino people. We have an influx of Caucasian people also.
You don't really see large numbers of African Americans continuing to move into Harlem. I mean, you do see some, but I think that's what's really shifting this trajectory.
What do they see next for Harlem as African Americans continue leaving the neighborhood and fewer blacks are moving in?
I can't predict the future, but as Harlem, becomes more and more non-black, because it's not just becoming white, but just non-black in general, I think, Harlem will start to lose some of its, it already has lost some of its significance as, the capital of Black America.
The way it's going, I don't think there are going to be a lot of people in Harlem in the next 20, 30 years.
I see us getting more eclectic and more rich in our arts and culture. I see people that are moving in, bringing in, being very respectful, but bringing in new ways of looking at old paradigms. I see us coming together in ways that we've never come before, in that fact that we understand that in order to grow and evolve, we have to open up who we are.